Hello, everyone. Picture this. It's a February morning in 1869, the kind that gnaws at the bone with cold, and the ancient stones of Westminster Abbey are not echoing with hymns, but with the brutal clang of metal on rock. Pickaxes bite into millennia-old mortar, their jarring rhythm underscored by the strained breathing of men hauling heavy flagstones. The air is thick, not merely with the usual dust of centuries, but with a deeper, more unsettling stagnation. It carries the faint, unmistakable, cloying sweetness of decay, trapped and concentrated for over 200 years in absolute darkness. Dean Arthur Stanley, a man whose curiosity often pulled him down forgotten paths, stood peering into the void that his workmen had just rent open beneath the intricate marble floor of Henry VIII's chapel. In his hands, he gripped conflicting fragments of history, architectural drawings that sketched impossible layouts, burial records that whispered contradictory truths. The specific quarry of his search was the lost tomb of King James I, a sovereign who had vanished from official memory almost as thoroughly as his physical remains seemed to have vanished from the Abbey's labyrinthine vaults. But what Stanley was about to uncover, bathed in the flickering, unreliable light of their torches, would peel back more than just stone and earth. It would expose a colder, more calculating side to England's glorious past, a hidden truth about the treatment of its royal dead that had been deliberately obscured, left to fester in the dark alongside the very remains it concerned. It was a truth that would make the skin crawl, that would forever stain the polished narrative of monarchs laid to rest with dignity and reverence. The space they had breached was not the grand marble-clad resting place Stanley had envisioned for a king. It was cramped, low-ceilinged, an unadorned cavity carved out of the earth beneath the Abbey's hallowed ground. The torchlight, casting wild, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe across the rough-hewn walls and low ceiling, illuminated the objects within. And there they were, stark and undeniable. Two lead coffins, resting one upon the other in a macabre, silent assertion of proximity. They were not nestled side by side in equal dignity, but stacked, one bearing down with immense weight upon the other, like forgotten cargo or some grotesque eternal bunk bed. The upper coffin was noticeably larger, its lead casing taking a more distinct, almost anatomical shape, unlike the plainer form beneath it. Centuries of damp and darkness had worked their slow, inexorable will upon the metal, leaving a thick greenish-white patina that gave the caskets an ancient alien appearance, as if they had lain undisturbed since the dawn of time. This vault, it turned out, was not the primary sepulchre of James I, whose final resting place remained elusive for the moment. Instead, this was the shared, unceremonious tomb of two half-sisters, queens both, yet interred with a shocking disregard for the animosities that had defined their lives, and, it seemed, continued to weigh upon their remains in death. Here lay Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen, the formidable Tudor whose reign had forged an empire, piled, quite literally, upon the remains of her Catholic half-sister, Mary the First, known to history as Bloody Mary. The sheer symbolism was stark, brutal. Two women, bitter rivals in life, separated by faith, politics, and mutual suspicion, now locked together in the suffocating dark, one crushing the other with the sheer physical finality of death. Dean Stanley and his team, guided by the scant and contradictory records, had been meticulously surveying the Abbey's burial sites. Queen Victoria herself had granted permission for this unprecedented archaeological undertaking, driven by the desire to finally locate the tomb of James I and bring order to the chaotic archival mess that had allowed royal graves to disappear from official knowledge. Their search had led them to the base of the elaborate monument in Henry VIII's chapel, a monument that ostensibly commemorated Elizabeth I. its inscription carefully crafted to bridge the chasm between the two sisters it supposedly housed. A tablet fixed at its base recorded the date of their intrusion. This vault was opened by the dean February 11th, 1869. The date itself held a curious resonance. Exactly 363 years to the day since Elizabeth of York, grandmother of both queens, had died in childbirth. Was it a deliberate symbolic choice by Stanley, a nod to the continuity of royal death, or merely a strange historical echo? Regardless of the date's significance, the reality revealed by the torchlight was far removed from the polished marble and grand narratives of the abbey's upper levels. This was the hidden truth, the grim, unvarnished consequence of mortality and political expediency played out in the subterranean dark. The very air, heavy with that sickeningly sweet scent of decomposition, seemed to bear witness to centuries of undisturbed putrefaction, a process hidden from the world, yet undeniably present. The lead coffins, designed to contain and preserve, had instead become silent metal pressure cookers, sealing in the gases of decay, holding the secrets of what had happened within for over 2 centuries. Knowing with a scholar's intuition and an explorer's nerve that this discovery was far more significant than simply finding the location of a tomb. It was a window into a darker history, a history of how the powerful, once dead, became objects, manipulated and disturbed, their remains subject to forces far less grand than the monuments erected in their memory. And the story of these 2 queens, stacked in the dark, began not in this echoing February of 1869, but long before, in the final agonizing days of one of England's greatest monarchs.
The air in the chambers of Richmond Palace on that cold March morning in 1603 was thick with a different kind of decay, the visible, agonizing decline of a legend. Queen Elizabeth I, the indomitable Gloriana, the monarch who had stared down empires and commanded the love and fear of a nation, lay not in state, but collapsed on the floor of her bedchamber. She had been there, according to whispered accounts, for 4 days, speechless, unresponsive, clinging to life with the desperate, unyielding grip of someone who understood, with a chilling certainty, that to lie down horizontally was to surrender to the inevitable, to never rise again. Her ladies-in-waiting, figures who had once vied for her sharp wit and favor, now moved about her with a fearful, hushed efficiency. They had covered the floor with cushions, a silent, grim acknowledgement of what was coming. They were not ministering to a sick queen, they were waiting for her to fall. This was not the glittering icon of royal portraiture, the ageless virgin queen of propaganda. This was a woman brought low by age, illness, and perhaps an overwhelming weariness of the burden she had carried for 45 years. Her physical and emotional ailments had escalated drastically in the preceding months. She had taken to standing for hours on end, up to 15 hours without assistance, supported only by sheer, defiant will, before collapsing onto the prepared floor. Imagine it, the most powerful woman in Europe, reduced to a static, agonizing vigil, too terrified to embrace the rest her failing body craved, because some primal instinct screamed that the horizontal plane was the threshold of death. This agonizing tableau played out day after day, a testament to both her legendary stubbornness and her profound, isolating fear of death. The court, ever attuned to omens and whispers, buzzed with dark portents. Elizabeth Southwell, one of the Queen's ladies, later recounted visions that haunted Elizabeth's final days, visions of her own frail form, ghost-like and insubstantial. More chillingly, Southwell reported the discovery of a playing card with a nail driven through its head resting on the Queen's chair. A playing card with a nail through its head. Consider the psychological torment such an object would inflict upon a woman who had spent her entire life navigating treacherous political waters, who believed her divine right to rule was absolute. This wasn't just a macabre prank. It was a targeted assault on the very foundations of her identity, a symbol of dark magic aimed at a ruler who felt increasingly vulnerable, increasingly detached from the divine favor she had always claimed. By this point, the once radiant queen was a shadow of her former self. The pearly smile that had captivated foreign ambassadors was gone, replaced by the sight of blackened gums, the result of lost teeth and decaying oral health. She suffered from significant hair loss, a cruel blow to a woman who had used her appearance as a tool of power. Perhaps most disturbingly, she had begun to refuse attendance, including bathing. The courtiers who had once jostled for proximity now recoiled from the stench that clung to her unwashed body, a smell that spoke not just of neglect, but of a deeper giving up, a withdrawal from the world she had so fiercely commanded. The physical decay mirrored the visible erosion of her spirit, leaving behind a figure both pathetic and terrifying in her refusal to yield. When Elizabeth finally succumbed on the morning of March 24th, 1603, something happened that immediately sparked speculation and secrecy. The Queen's Lady of the Bedchamber, presumably acting on prior instruction, absolutely refused to allow a post-mortem examination of the Queen's body. In an era where such examinations were not uncommon, especially for monarchs whose health and cause of death carried immense political significance, this refusal was extraordinary. Was it, as some later argued, merely an attempt to preserve the myth of the Virgin Queen, to prevent any physical evidence that might contradict the carefully constructed narrative of her untouched body? But why such extreme measures? What specifically about her body, ravaged by age and illness, required such absolute secrecy? Was there something more sinister hidden within? Something that couldn't be allowed to fall into the hands of physicians, or worse, the prying eyes of the court and future historians? This refusal, this deliberate concealment, cast a long shadow, fueling centuries of whispered theories. It added another layer of mystery to the already complex figure of Elizabeth, turning her death into a puzzle box, locked and buried with her. And buried she would be, not with the quiet simplicity that such a frail, dying woman might seem to warrant, but with a spectacle designed to project power and glory even in death, a stark, almost defiant contrast to the crumbling reality she had become in her final days. The journey from the decaying reality of Richmond Palace to the timeless stone of Westminster Abbey was about to begin, carrying a body shrouded in secrecy towards a resting place that would prove anything but peaceful.
The funeral procession that snaked its way through the streets of London on April 28, 1603, was not merely a ceremony, it was a performance of national grief and continuity, a deliberate display of power and presence that sought to transcend the physical absence of the monarch. From Whitehall Palace to Westminster Abbey, the route was lined with multitudes of people, crammed into streets, houses, windows, even perched precariously on rooftops and gutters, all drawn by the gravitational pull of history unfolding before them. Grown men wept openly. The hearse, draped in rich black velvet and drawn by horses similarly adorned, was a somber, majestic sight. Upon it rested Elizabeth's lead coffin, itself encased within a wooden casket. But what truly captured the raw emotion of the crowds, what made mourners gasp and brought forth a wave of collective sighing, groaning, and weeping the like of which, it was recorded, had not been seen in the memory of man, was the effigy. Perched atop the coffin, dressed in royal robes, grasping a scepter and crowned, was a painted wooden figure of Elizabeth I. It was astonishingly lifelike, a masterpiece of funerary art designed to present the Queen not as a frail, deceased woman, but as the enduring symbol of her reign. For those who beheld it, it was as if Elizabeth herself lay there, still commanding, still refusing to yield her authority even in death. This effigy, a carefully constructed image of eternal glory, was the public face of the funeral, designed to console, to impress, and to project stability during the precarious transition of power. Below it, hidden from sight within the layers of wood and lead, lay the stark, physical reality of the Queen's remains, a truth far removed from the marble permanence of the Abbey or the painted perfection of her likeness.
Elizabeth's body, meticulously sealed within a heavy lead coffin, the standard for royal burials, intended to preserve the body and contain the inevitable odors of decomposition, was initially interred in the vault of her grandfather, King Henry VII, beneath his magnificent monument in the abbey. Lead coffins were indeed the norm, signifying status and attempting to defy the swift erasure of time. Yet as history would repeatedly show, they possessed their own sinister secrets, often becoming less a vessel of preservation and more a sealed environment for the grim chemistry of decay. But Elizabeth's resting place was not destined to remain undisturbed for long. Just 3 years after her death in 1606, a decision was made by her successor, King James I, that revealed the cold political calculus that often dictated the fate of royal remains. James, in a move steeped in complex symbolism and political convenience, ordered Elizabeth's body moved. Her new, final resting place would be the north aisle of Henry VII's chapel, not alone, but alongside her half-sister, Mary I. Consider the potent irony, the deliberate, almost cruel juxtaposition. Elizabeth and Mary, two queens whose lives had been defined by bitter opposition, religious conflict, and political maneuvering, one having ordered the execution of the other's allies, the other having signed the death warrant for the mother of James I, Mary, Queen of Scots, a different Mary, adding yet another layer to the tangled web of royal death. In life, they were enemies. In death, James I quite literally stacked one on top of the other. Elizabeth's massive lead coffin, weighing hundreds of pounds, was placed directly on top of Mary's coffin in a vault beneath a new white marble monument. This monument, commissioned by James from sculptor Maximilian Colt and painted by Jan Dietrich, bore only Elizabeth's effigy and inscription celebrating her reign. Mary, who had ruled for 5 tumultuous and bloody years, was effectively reduced to a silent footnote, buried beneath her sister's glory, her own monument having been moved elsewhere. The inscription placed on the shared tomb attempted to smooth over the awkward reality with diplomatic platitudes. Partners enthroned in grave, here we sleep, Elizabeth and Mary, sisters in the hope of the resurrection. But the physical arrangement told a different, more brutal story. There was no equal partnership, no sisterly embrace in this dark, subterranean space. There was only the immense weight of Elizabeth's coffin pressing down, year after year, decade after decade, upon the remains of her sister, a grotesque, silent assertion of dominance that continued even beyond the veil of death. This act, while maybe motivated by a desire to consolidate royal burials, or simply by architectural convenience, also fit into a broader, deeply disturbing pattern of how royal remains were treated throughout British history. The dead, no matter how powerful in life, frequently became pawns in political games, their tombs disturbed, their bodies moved, sometimes even plundered. This casual desecration was far from unusual. It was almost standard practice. Medieval and Renaissance monarchs, church officials, and even later antiquarians routinely opened, examined, and sometimes removed items from the tombs of their predecessors. The story of Elizabeth and Mary, stacked high in the dark, was just one more chapter in a long, unsettling history of the living imposing their will upon the dead, turning human remains into objects of political manipulation, historical curiosity, or even, as was frighteningly common, relics and commodities.
Back in that dimly lit, cramped vault in 1869, the details revealed by Dean Stanley's flickering torchlight spoke volumes beyond the simple fact of 2 stacked coffins. The condition of the lead itself, tarnished but intact, offered its own silent narrative. The upper coffin, undeniably Elizabeth's, was larger and, as Stanley noted in his account, more distinctly shaped in the form of the body. This phrase, carefully chosen for Victorian sensibilities, hinted at a disturbing truth. The lead, soft over time, had yielded to the shape of the decomposing body within, preserving a macabre outline of the queen beneath its metal shell. While Stanley's published words were discreet, intended for an audience unused to the raw realities of mortality, his private observations, or those of his accompanying team, must surely have encompassed more.
The stench, that concentrated atmosphere of decay released after 2 centuries of containment, would have been overwhelming. Elizabeth Southwell's controversial account of the Queen's corpse exploding in her lead coffin, while perhaps exaggerated, wasn't entirely baseless. Decomposition in a sealed lead environment produces gases, methane, hydrogen sulfide, ammonia, which build pressure until the seal is breached or the coffin distorts. The Victorian researchers opening vaults like this were encountering the physical consequences of centuries of this process. Beyond the shape and the smell, the lead surfaces held other secrets. Stanley meticulously documented the markings upon Elizabeth's coffin lid, the Tudor rose, the Queen's initials, and significant dates, tracing her journey from life to final rest. But there were other, less official inscriptions etched into the soft metal. Graffiti. Someone named John Ware had carved his name along with the date EC5, interpreted as 1645. The year James I was interred elsewhere, perhaps prompting access to other vaults during rearrangements. Who was John Ware? A workman? An official overseeing some task? Or something more sinister, a grave robber perhaps? We will likely never know his identity or his motive, but his graffiti, scrawled onto the coffin of a deceased monarch, was a stark, unsettling reminder that royal vaults were not the inviolable sanctuaries they were purported to be. It raised disturbing questions. If someone could carve their name on a queen's coffin, what else might they have done? In an age where royal relics, hair, teeth, bones, even embalming fluid were valuable commodities sought by collectors, physicians, and those who believed in their magical properties, an unguarded vault of royal remains presented an irresistible, horrifying opportunity. The historical record is littered with instances of royal bodies being disturbed and their parts treated with shocking casualness. King Edward the Confessor's coffin was opened in 1163, his beard intact, his clothing stripped for relics. The body of Duke Humphrey of Gloucester was plundered for its embalming fluid, believed to cure wrinkles, until only a few bones remained. Queen Mary Tudor's coffin was opened in 1784, her hair examined for its length and color. Fragments from Richard II's tomb were later found in a cigarette box. Queen Catherine of Valois' corpse was displayed to visitors for centuries for a fee paid to Abbey staff. The traffic in royal body parts was a grim reality. In this context, the stacked coffins of Elizabeth and Mary, sealed in the dark, bearing the mark of a casual intruder, spoke of a vulnerability that transcended their earthly power. Elizabeth's lead coffin itself, a massive object weighing over 500 pounds, requiring 8 pallbearers in modern times, had for over 260 years pressed down upon Mary's. It was a physical manifestation of the historical narrative, one queen crushing the other, not through political might, but through the relentless force of gravity and the passage of time. No amount of ceremony, no grand monument above ground could erase this grotesque reality unfolding in the darkness below. Dean Stanley's discovery, while adding detail to the historical record, also highlighted the profound contrast between the public image and the hidden truth. Above the vault, the marble monument depicted Elizabeth in eternal glory, crowned, sceptered, adorned. An earlier description of her painted effigy noted its vibrant colors, the gilded lions, the lifelike flesh tones, a deliberate work of art designed to present a lie, a perpetual icon of power and beauty. Below, in the cold, damp earth, lay the reality. Whatever remained in the lead box, subject to the same inevitable forces of decay that claimed the humblest peasant, stacked like luggage, eternally tethered to the sister she despised in life. Elizabeth I, who had fought so fiercely for her independence, who had refused to be defined or controlled by any man, was ultimately conquered not by Philip of Spain or a foreign invader, but by time, chemistry, and the cold, post-mortem decisions of those who outlived her. She, who boasted the heart and stomach of a king, found that even such regal organs are no match for the relentless process of putrefaction or the political manipulations of her successors. The true horror, the true stench in the story, isn't just the physical smell of decay from a centuries-old coffin. It's the moral odor of a society that couldn't let its most powerful dead rest in peace, that treated royal remains as objects to be moved, examined, or defiled. Every disturbance, every opening of the vault, every inscription carved into the lead reveals something ugly about the living.
James I's stacking showed a casual disregard for human dignity. John Ware's graffiti exposed the vulnerability of even royal sanctity. Stanley's scientific curiosity, while leading to historical insight, still involved disturbing the dead. And even today in the retelling of this story, we risk reducing these real human remains, these lives lived and lost, to mere historical curiosities consumed for entertainment. We are, in a sense, still not letting Elizabeth rest. Today, as visitors walk through the hallowed halls of Westminster Abbey, they tread upon history, both glorious and grim. Beneath their feet, hidden from view, lie not just the celebrated monuments to England's greatest queen, but the quiet, persistent reality of that lead coffin, slowly corroding, its contents slowly settling, its immense weight still pressing down upon the bones of her sister after more than 400 years. The Virgin Queen, who never bowed to any man in life, lies forever horizontal in death, finally conquered by the one force she could not defy: time. And in that eternal darkness, if lead could speak and stone could whisper, perhaps they would tell tales not just of queens and kings, but of the shared human fate that awaits all, the ultimate democracy of decay, reminding us that beneath all the marble, pageantry, and purported dignity, we are all, in the end, just flesh and bone, waiting our turn to feed the darkness that claims us all.